Hi everyone, I'm Robert Simmons. I'm sub-editor for print, digital, social media for ESTA UK and also social media editor for the forthcoming ESTA International Conference, which is going to be held in Cardiff in the spring. And we're delighted today to have our inaugural webinar, which is supported and sponsored by Dario, who are the principal sponsors of the forthcoming conference. And we welcome Benedict Holland, who is a violinist. Hi, Ben. He's a violinist and a professor, personal chair in violin, in fact. I'll have to ask Ben later what that actually means. At the Royal Northern College of Music, he's got a class at the Royal Northern Junior College and formerly taught at Cheetham School of Music until last year, I think. So welcome, Ben.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Rob.
So before I should say that I haven't seen Ben for 20 years, but so it's lovely to see him again. He was my teacher at the Royal Northern. It's very aging, this whole thing. But from 98 to 2002, and I've found increasingly that I think to a lot of gems and words of wisdom that Ben says when I'm practicing, teaching and performing. So with your permission, Ben, I've got some questions written down. And I'm going to sort of work my way through them. But I can see there's already quite a few of you who have joined us, which is lovely, from all over Europe. And if you've got any questions of your own, then please just type them into the Q&A box and I'll work my way through them. And if there's any I miss, don't worry, we can follow up with those afterwards. So to start with, I just wanted to say to Ben, you studied with some great teachers, didn't you? Can you tell us a little bit about them and about their qualities?
Yes, I think my first main teacher was Manuk Perikian, an Armenian, an orchestral leader of great distinction and a chamber musician. And he taught me at the academy briefly, because I left the academy after a short period of time. But I really enjoyed working with him. He was an impeccable musician. It's very stylish playing, quite an old school teacher. I mean, if he couldn't do something, perhaps you ought to try practicing more hours first. And I think in a way I reached a bit of an impasse. It wasn't his fault particularly. And I left the academy and then took a little bit of space to find what I wanted to do in my life. And realized the function of being a musician in society a bit more than when I was a bit immature, when I first went at the age of 17. And then I did 4 years at the RNCM with Yossi Zivoni, who I regard as my principal teacher, and he was such a kind, caring, considerate person, marvelous violinist, and he had a very good, well-schooled method of teaching, the scales, the etudes, the chosen repertoire, which he did give to most of his other pupils, to be fair. And he, as you mentioned yourself just now, Rob, that you kindly think of things that I mentioned to you. I often think about both those teachers because many of the things they said I couldn't possibly really implement in the 4 years at college. They needed really embedding in over a period of time. So I still think about them as well a lot.
Yeah, and are you still in touch with Yossi? Is he still teaching at the Northern? I'm not sure.
I think he's officially retired this year after, gosh, how many years? Oh, it's incredible. 60?
Yeah,
I don't know.
It is incredible, yeah. And a fantastic recorded legacy as well with Bach and many other recordings, I think.
You must remember him from the building then, seeing him.
Yeah, of course. And certainly as a student, I think at that time, I imagine students are still the same. I mean, I'm not that old, for goodness sake, but I think back to those kind of family trees of teachers and musicians, and it's a really interesting thing, isn't it, to think, oh, Ben studied with Yossi, who studied with such and such, and tracing those back it's a really fascinating thing, I find.
But definitely so. The schools of violin playing, the tree has opened out considerably, as I'm sure you agree, with globalization and so on. But when I was a student, it's very much schools of playing. So there's Yossi with his Franco-Belgian school, and I don't know who Manuk's teachers were, Manu Prikian's teachers were, but then there were people who taught in the Russian style and the American style. And some of my colleagues, my friends, went to study in the States if they could find enough money usually. And it was a very good school there, you know, or they go to Vienna. And there's this very clearly defined paths and repertoire that went with it. Now, I don't think it's quite there. You know, information is accessible, amazing masterclasses online, visiting people from all around the world, and information shared more freely and generously.
Yeah, well, I suppose when you were studying, it was probably early in the time that that whole Russian school would have been open to students over here. I mean, that would have been quite a secretive sort of school of playing, wouldn't it?
It would seem to be. I know what you mean. We have plenty of Russian teachers here now, don't we? Yeah. And then there was a sort of breakaway school to America when that happened with Heifetz and people like that, Zimbalist and so on. Yes, I agree with you. But it's lovely to see that not one size fits everyone. And so my view is probably to take the best of everything, but then remember that every student is different with their physical and mental makeup, and find out what works best. That's my view.
I mean, I would associate you a little bit with the Galamian school, because I remember you telling us all to get that Galamian teaching book quite early on. And of course, the Galamian scales was, I think you told us to get before we even arrived at the Royal Northern, which is a really interesting and useful method for learning scales and teaching scales and keeping yourself in good nick. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that school of thought?
Yes, well, I think scale systems are a bit of a nightmare, actually, because obviously I was brought up with Carl Flesch, and then I got a little bit exhausted with that, and then I went to the Galamian scale system, and I recently bought Simon Fisher's books, and I don't know, a scale is a scale. It can start on any note, it can be any combination of things. I think the Carl Flesch gives you a good approach to how to sight read music from that era. And the Galamian opened up a huge amount, but it's such a massive thing. I believe somebody wants to ask Perlman if he practiced his Galamian scales that day, and he just laughed his head off. It's just not possible. I think you have to take the best out of these systems. So actually, at the RNCM, we have technical tests for the first year, second years, third years. And they're not a massive amount of scales they're asked to do. They're asked to do a variety, including some 4 octaves and different bowings and articulations, etc. But I find that if I stick to the curriculum and just get them to concentrate on those for the exam, then those scales have got to be beautiful. And if you can do beautiful scales just for those few even, then you're going to have good shifting, good tone production, evenness and fluency. But, you know, not all students like playing scales, and you can't make a horse drink. So what are you going to do? You have to encourage them to find scale patterns in the repertoire that they do. So yes, it's a difficult one. I'm not dogmatic when it comes to scale systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I said in my email to you that I described you as a pragmatic teacher. And I mean that as a great compliment, in that, you know, in the same way that you've just talked about different schools of violin technique and about different scale systems and that sort of thing, you know, there was no one-size-fits-all approach to your teaching. Was that something that was deliberate, or something that was learnt from, obviously, your very different teachers?
Yeah.
Or what?
Well, I think it came from the fact that I realized that every student I came across could do something naturally that I couldn't do as well. And so it was that's why I thought, if I have a teaching and performing career, I could really develop and make something of a life's quest, really, playing the violin. So I set about trying to work at the things I couldn't do as well, and at the same time trying to vary what I could do, so I could get into the mindset of each student and maybe help them find out their weaker points or the bits that needed developing. But more importantly, not just to show them how to do something, but how to undo something and replace it with something perhaps more efficient. And so each student comes with different capabilities. And I think you have to, and different physiques and different size instruments and different mindsets. And sometimes they're human beings, sometimes they're highs and lows, and they're young and going to need a bit of steering at times, you know. So I didn't take the idea that I should be on a pedestal and people should come to me and worship at my feet, because there's no way I can do that. But I always tried to do my warm-ups before I went to teach, so I could demonstrate to a decent level and prepare my students honestly and get them ready for masterclasses, say. And then the masterclass teacher can come in and say, well, by the way, you need to develop X, Y, Z. They come back and say, well, this masterclass teacher said I need, and I say, great, let's do it. You know, I'm working with you. We're working together. And I think that when I left music college, I did have occasional lessons with orchestral leaders and people like that, because I was really interested. And I think I've realized since the value of working long-term with somebody who can understand you a bit better and who can see you performing, for example, and help to guide you a bit more. And I think if the student realizes that's my role for them, they don't feel that they're getting second best treatment by not being perhaps with a big soloist who can say this is how it's done. You know, I think there's teachers for each kind of type of student, but I'm hoping that I can reach out to a wider range, maybe.
Yeah, it's a difficult job, I would imagine, for a professor to kind of guide them through those 4 years.
Well, you're not going to win them all, and it's a sad fact in human existence that not everyone's going to like you as a person anyway. Maybe so the best you can hope for is that they're going to respect you, and the student's going to respect the teacher. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, you know. And I don't believe in clinging on to students. And inevitably, you do get sometimes a little bit connected, and it can be a bit of a wrench and things like that. But I think it's not good for teachers to get too close to their students in that respect.
Sure. Sorry for I'm in a classroom in Chichester, and there's every chance that they'll lock the music department on me or kick me out. So I had a little look over.
Oh no!
Whilst I have this little break, we've just had someone's popped up on the chat. Dijana Ihas. I'm sorry if I've pronounced that incorrectly, but welcome. I know the name very well from ESTA conferences. Galamian's scale system is based on his Soviet Union teacher Konstantin Moser metrorhythmic variations. That is probably the most generous gift of the Soviet school to the West. Konstantin Mostras, rather. So thanks for that. Any more little tidbits, feel free to type them in the chat. Thank you. And, of course, questions. And that's something I've often thought about of you, is that kind of lack of ego in your teaching, in that you would readily let us as students go and perform for masterclasses, go and perform for stages, as they were called then. When we were sort of quite young players, we weren't polished in any way. And I think some teachers would have held their students back from doing that because it might reflect badly upon them. So I think that was quite brave of you to do that. And is that difficult to do, to let your student go out and make a real mess of it sometimes?
Oof, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Because each student is going to be slightly different here. I think we can learn from disappointments. You know, I learned a lot from doing bad auditions, for example. I come away and think, now I know what it really felt like to play that excerpt. And I really know now what I need to do for next time. And I think sometimes students are shy at putting themselves forward, thinking I need to be a finished product until I play in front of people. Now at the RNCM, and I think other institutions too, to be fair, we have friendly kind of stages, probably more friendly than when you were there, Rob. Even the shy stages, classes where you can turn up and have friends or no friends invited. You know, the student can dictate a little bit more what they do and feel more secure. I think, yeah, the psychology of not letting the stage get in the way. It's a bit similar to in sports. You know, when you're learning, I do tennis. I like tennis. I learn tennis. I'm not very good, but you have to learn the process of certain shots, which may mean, say, for example, if you want to improve your serve, you may be prepared to let the ball go out before you can rein it in, that kind of idea. And so what I tried to do, and I try to do now, is I do play the piano for my classes and things like that. So I make sure that the students have an idea of the music they're going to play, and they really should be ready, but I can't predict how they're going to get ready for the few days or weeks before that particular exposure. But we don't have that many staff pianists, so they get a little rehearsal and then they get to play for the class. So I make sure they're well prepared and they know the music really, really well, so they're not going to feel out of their depth. And I'm hoping, we get very good critiques as well. They're very friendly, but they're very pertinent from people like Kathy Yates, our assistant head of strings. And it's funny, really, the comments that they give, even in those first recitals, they last for the 4 years. And if it's a marked thing, well, sometimes the marks will continue up for those 4 years. So it just shows that if you're going to develop in 4 years, you've got to do more than just maintain. If you want to do a change, you're going to have to really shift a gear, or something special is going to happen.
Yes.
So I hope you didn't feel put off by that process.
I loved the weekly class. I found it terrifying. So for those that aren't familiar with this, it mustn't just be the Northern, it's a European development, I think, initially, wasn't it, that Rodney brought in? Maybe?
Oh, was it? Mm.
I'm not sure. But anyway, there was a weekly class with your teacher, and I was in Ben's class, so there were maybe some years 15, 18, 20 of us, and quite regularly you'd play at whatever stage your piece was at, often with a pianist. So it could be terrifying because you weren't on top of it, but you had to kind of perform. But I have to say, looking back on it, that did get over a lot of performance nerves. It helped memorizing things, and getting that feedback from your peers can be brutal, but it is ultimately really rewarding and well meant. It's has the Northern changed a lot since my time? I imagine there must be some big changes over those 20 years.
Yeah, I think all the conservatoires have. I think there's a wider range of courses and options, professional development schemes. There's a wider range of orchestras. You can do Baroque, you can do viola. I think there's more psychological support. I'm bet there's many more things I can't list that I'm not thinking about right now, but I think it has changed an awful lot, yeah. No, I think it's more about the student experience for each student. Because when I was at music college, I think if you were regarded as not so good as some others, you were treated, less fairly, I think, when it came to exposure and being pushed by the college. It's a sad fact, but now I think it's more about personal development. So students can learn other things, like they can take electives, like how to teach, things like that, or you can be assessed on orchestral performances. I think it's the same in most colleges now. I think the student can pick and choose a lot more to their strengths.
That's fantastic. And, obviously, representing ESTA here, I do think that teaching in the past was probably viewed as of lesser importance than your playing career. But, of course, that's completely wrong. And even in this day and age, when there's less funding, more people going for jobs and that sort of thing, then it's important to be able to teach and to teach well. And certainly not regard it as a lesser career option.
Completely. I think when I first went to music college, most people would say their aspirations were to be a chamber musician or a soloist.
Yeah. Well,
so if you've got a job in an orchestra, you might get a little mention on the notice board amongst the college successes, but not much, And now I think when people come to interview, they say, well, I'd love to have a portfolio career, do some teaching, do this and the other, or I want to be a session musician. Or they say, many say, I really want to get an orchestral job. And we know how sought after and how competitive they are now as well. So that has definitely changed.
Ben, I noticed that in lockdown, you started a short series of tutorials on YouTube, which I really enjoyed looking at the other day.
Oh, good.
I see there's only 3 of them. You probably need to...
It took me ages, actually, Rob. I haven't got the time to do any more. I don't know how people do them, actually.
Students that you teach nowadays, what devices and apps are they using that you might want to talk about for their practice, their preparation, and what do you use yourself?
Well, clearly tuning apps are great. They're very good. And I love working with drones, so very calming, in the morning, I will go to Cello Drones on YouTube and put, say, if I'm going to do a few scales in C major that day, I'll put a nice drone on, and yeah, it feels very wholesome, and I don't feel too overly critical for the first few minutes, at least. And metronomes have changed, haven't they? Some metronomes can do a cellorandi and decelerandos and so on. And what else do I use? Well, obviously those accompaniments are now online and you can get them slowed down and things like that. But a mobile phone, you can record yourself. It's quite decent, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And I think it's very good to just record a few bars of something because it gets you listening in a different way to what comes out of the instrument and videoing. So I think it's so much easier. I use a lot on iPad now to learn. So if I go in to teach and I've forgotten to bring my Bruch Concerto in G minor, I can just go into IMSLP, or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's really great. And, I've got my foot pedal, so I'm not too much of a dinosaur. So yeah. These are the sort of things I think that you can do now.
Definitely.
And students can record their lessons if they wish as well, much more easily. I'd rather they tell me so I didn't make some comments about the weather or how I was feeling or something, but yeah.
Absolutely. So when you're playing along to that drone, are you improvising, or is that for scales or what?
I don't personally do much improvising on the drones, but I do them for tuning scales, I think, predominantly, in a tempered intonation, and also non-tempered and things like that. And just sort of getting myself into producing nice sound and things like that. Yeah, I prefer that rather than just have a tuning machine and tune each note, because I think it doesn't give you a very good sense of the tonality you're in.
Sure. Ben, let's move on from teaching to talk about a little bit more about your playing. You play currently for SAFA, the SAFA ensemble in Manchester, don't you? The contemporary music group. Can you tell us a bit about your work with them?
Oh, it's been amazing. I've been with them, 12 years, 10 years. Working with the contemporary music came at a time when I was looking for a direction forward, and this has given me a new impetus. Our patron was Peter Maxwell Davies, and he was wonderful to work with. It's now Mark Anthony Turnage. We work with great composers, Mark Simpson, also all sorts of John Cascan, actually loads and loads. And we also do lots with up and coming composers, particularly composers who have left music college or left university and are trying to establish a career with all kinds of composing force streams. And I think we've always done our concerts on and putting them up on YouTube, filmed them, and it's given me a huge new impetus forward, as I said, and excitement in playing and having to learn new skills.
Absolutely. And what particular techniques have you had to learn? That's probably a little bit too much to kind of distill that, but
well, I think of course. Well, one of the things I had to do actually was to pick up the viola, which I've never really taken that seriously. So because we're based on the original Fires of London format, where the violinist has to play viola sometimes, like in Piero Lunaire. So we did that recently, and of course that was quite a thing. I had to sort of virtually memorize the viola part. So that's also really interesting. But I think also talking about scale systems, the Carl Flesch scale system, for example, I realized it sort of left off where this contemporary music has taken off, and I needed a new way of thinking intonation and things like that, quarter tones, not just quarter tones, but intervals. And luckily I came across a guy called Terje-Moe Hansen and his navigation of the fingerboard into geometry. And I use those principles a lot in my teaching now, and also it's helped me to improve my navigation of the fingerboard. I don't know if you come across that system, but it's quite revolutionary.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, he basically divides, takes 2 octaves in the fingerboard. So, for example, open E to 2 octaves, a higher E, and then divides that into 2 to get the E in between. And that's almost like the starting point, really, that middle note. And then you could divide it into thirds. So if you divided an octave into thirds, for example, you'd have E, G sharp, C, natural E, or halves, E, A sharp, aka B flat, E, quarters. 6 is like a whole tone scale in 1 octave. 12 is a chromatic scale. Now, in that 2 octaves, there are 600 permutations of intervals. And if you take it across 4 strings, 12,400. So it's pretty infinite. And you can practice visualizing and hearing before you play, and then going from one to another. And you can practice, you can do it in tempered intonation, ill-tempered intonation, all kinds of intonations if you want. And you can play with a musical intention. But I found it freed me from tonality, which is why when I'm playing conventional pieces, I like to use drones to get back into that type of mindset too. The other thing that I learned from playing contemporary music was, in terms of tone production, effects and extremes. So extreme flautando, say, to extreme ponticello, gives you an awareness of all the different colors in between those. And that took me back to the 5 contact points of Carl Flesch and how he taught tone production and the basis of tone production: bow speed, weight, and contact point. And so I had to think further about that. So exploring the extremes helped me with the norms. Also working with contemporary composers and getting to know them, and the excitement of finding out what they're thinking when they're writing. And they can write for you and your capabilities. You can ask them all sorts of questions, and you can help them as well with their notation. Well, I think you can take that kind of excitement and use your imagination by reading into the past to see how Beethoven was thinking. Now, I know lots of people do that anyway, but for me, it was a bit of a revelation, this kind of thing. So it opened up new possibilities.
Sure, that's really interesting. And someone's actually put in the chat, would it be possible to write in the chat the title of that system? I'll tell you what we'll do. When I edit this video, because hopefully we'll post it afterwards on YouTube, I'll get in touch with Ben, and any titles like that, I'll make sure are written in the notes.
It's absolutely brilliant. I think it's revolutionary at the time. It was reviewed by ESTA, and a lot of people made comments about how revolutionary was their way of thinking. I will definitely, I'll definitely put the details up. I'm sure many people know of this, but just even applying the principles in a small way can really help the way you approach the fingerboard.
I mean, actually, that sounds like the perfect next installment of your YouTube series.
I could demonstrate it, actually, not necessarily very well, but I could demonstrate it. Yeah.
Can you do it now?
Yeah, sure. So here's, and you could use different starting points, but he uses the open string. There's your octave. There's a half. It's thirds, quarters, 6, and then you use that octave. So we're all very familiar with that octave, but then you get equally familiar with that one, the same way. Etc., etc., etc. And then you can go from different points. So here's half in the first octave to half in the second octave. And then you can go cross string. So here's half on the A string to half on the E string, or half to half on the upper octave of the E string. So you can, and then if you really want to take it further, you can change infinitely. Well, not infinitely, but you can change your geometric changes as well from your starting points.
Yeah.
Does that make some sort of sense?
It does make some sort of sense.
It's absolutely fascinating.
People watching this, I'm sure, than me struggling to.
Well, you can create your own tone rows. So you can say, I'm going to go from a third on the D string to 2/3 on the E string. Mathematics, but it's not far off the Viennese school, is it?
Fantastic. Yeah, that's very.
Now, the Viennese school is very hard to approach via Carl Flesch, in my view. And I'm very humbled to be talking on this program, by the way, because I'm aware that people listening in have massive knowledge of all these things in great detail. So it's a privilege to be here.
There's some very esteemed participants I can see here. So thanks all for joining us. I tell you what, actually, Ben, we talked about tech earlier, and probably the only good thing as a musician to have come out of lockdown was discovering Zoom for the first time.
Yes.
You know, all these things, greater use of YouTube and other ways to communicate to a big audience, I guess. I came across a lovely YouTube video of Safa playing the Gavin Bryars Jesus Blood Hasn't Failed Me Yet. Is that what it's called?
Oh, yes, it is, yeah.
That's definitely one to look up for anyone watching this webinar. It's a long piece, and so simple, but really, really beautiful, really emotional. Do you like that piece, Ben?
It's one of these cult pieces, isn't it? Yeah. I think when I first heard it, I couldn't stop playing it, and I got one of those earworms, you know, it wouldn't go away.
It's a really worm.
Reportedly, Gavin Bryars, was it Gavin Bryars? He came across somebody who was destitute, I think, singing this, and he couldn't find a placement for this melody, but it bugged him as well. And he put some harmonies to it, and it just repeats, doesn't it? And repeats and repeats with slightly different orchestrations. And oh yeah, it really grabs hold of you.
Yeah, it might be one that's better for the listener than the performer. It's a long one, but yeah, I recommend you all go and find that. It's with Safa, and Ben's leading that, and I think it's in pitch black. I can't remember where it was recorded.
It was filmed in the opera studio, was it?
Oh, it was at the RNCM, wasn't it?
At the RNCM.
I'm just looking, if anyone has any questions, now's probably the time. I've only got one more question, and I'm slightly concerned about getting locked in a music department overnight. So I would just ask you all, please don't be shy. Type anything you like in the Q&A, and I will ask Ben. And if you prefer to email me, then I can pass on any other questions. I'm sure he'd be happy to give you some advice. But just keep an eye out. I'll keep an eye out on the Q&A. I'm just scrolling down a few notes here. And just before I go to a couple more final questions, I just want to reiterate our thanks to Daddario and Marcus, who is another Yossi Zivoni student, as he reminded me earlier on today, for the idea for this website. Ben's a Daddario artist, and they are kindly sponsoring the forthcoming conference, which is in 2023 in Cardiff. I think my penultimate question actually was, I remember at the Northern, when I was there, that you would take part in conducting classes. You know, you were obviously a esteemed professor at the Northern, but you would often be found trying something out with another tutor, or, you know, finessing some conducting, and I admired that. And I know you've been a repetteur and you conduct, or at least you have done. I don't know if you still do. You perform chamber music, lead orchestras, you're a great pianist. Is continuing your musical development the key to a long and fruitful musical life?
Oh, it's a nice question. And I've been lucky enough to be able to, by and large, do this, you know. I think I realised that teaching was a way forward for me to just develop as a musician. And I managed in Manchester. I mean, I was working as a young man in a scene which had plenty of freelance work, and there are many more opportunities than there are now. I was lucky enough to be able to raise a family with my wife, had an income, luckily. And it's been really, really important. I think at one point I did go down the idea of thinking about conducting, and I worked as a repetiteur for Buxton Opera and Opera North and people like that. And I learned a huge amount from working with singers. It sort of took me out of the technical process of making notes happen, and more about the thinking of why and stories, and maybe even classical composers like Mozart, who maybe came from an opera base first and foremost. So if you can understand the sort of emotions that go with, say, Mozart's music in particular context, you can find out how the violin concerti work. And also the infinite number of sounds that singing can do. So I really got into that, and I think that was important for me in my development. That was the first thing, and then the contemporary music was the next one for me. It's always, so yes, always trying new things.
It's important. I've got another question for you from the chat now. Frederick Strum, how do you practice tempered intonation in scales or pieces? I find it incredibly hard since the ear wants either melodic or harmonic intonation.
Thinking the system I've described of geometry as well, you can practice that with equal thirds, equal tones, equal semitones, equal quarter tones. You can also put them into the context of a key where you will feel the leading notes, etc., etc. So you can contrast that. I think as string players, we have to work with the piano a lot. So it's quite clear sometimes when we're not playing in tune with the piano, but it also equally, if you're playing a melody with the piano and it's your turn to shine in that melody, you may want to make your intonation expressive. So you do need to have an idea of the structure of the fourths and the fifths and the octaves within the scale or the key of the piece that you're in. And I work a lot now in the string quartet. I did start off with a piano quartet. And then so I think I was quite used to playing the piano. Over the last few years, I developed a string quartet. And so I've had to learn a new kind of thinking about intonation. Sometimes we're part of a chord. Other times we need to be expressive. A lot of it comes down to personal taste. And in the end, there's no rights and wrongs when that moment to be expressive comes into it. But if you play regularly with the piano and chamber music, you'll soon realize where the thirds need to be lowered and things like that. It's what brass players do. I hear them in the corridors of the RNCM. They're forever meeting in groups and doing chorales and the trombones and things like that. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Let us know, Frederick. Just two more quick fire questions. I remember at the Northern having a lesson playing on a mini trampoline to get nice springy legs. I remember, I think this was from you, playing like that to release tension in the neck. So can you give us 3 similarly pragmatic, weird, whatever tricks that we might use in our own practice?
Well, the trick about the tongue between the teeth to avoid tension, I got from Richard Deakin, who got from his Italian teacher. Was it Franco Gulli or somebody? So there's nothing original in this world. Maybe the technology changes, but there's nothing original. One of the things I developed was the idea of counting out aloud while playing. So, for example, if it were the Spring Sonata, you go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Things like that. It's a competing task, and so it liberates the brain a little bit, but it also keeps the breath flowing. So that's a really good tip.
That's a great one. I don't remember that. I should try that.
Yeah, I think that's very, very good. I think also visualization is really great, and you will know this, Rob, with your busy lifestyle with the ballet and a family and things like this, that if you find yourself on a train journey or something like that, you can shut your eyes and feel the fingerboard, hear the pieces before you play them, and you can actually work out how you're going to get from one place to the other, for example, or how the bow's going to do the string crossings without the violin being in hand. So I think visualization, singing, and if you can play the piano, I do most of my contemporary music preparation at the piano. There's no point in picking up the violin trying to work out complex rhythms. That's another good thing for contemporary music. I've had to be very good on rhythms and subdivisions and strange time signatures, but also stylistically aware, because there's no such thing as one style of contemporary music anymore. It can be almost traditional, it can be any sort of things. So there's my 2 main tips. Using your memory as well. Using your memory is amazing if you can do that.
Yeah. And finally, Ben, can you give us a word of wisdom, a piece of advice to a student that may be watching this, trying to decide whether to go to conservatoire or to university? What should they do, and how should they make that difficult decision?
Of course. I suppose it all depends on how they're placed with their playing. I think conservatoire suits some people and university suits others. It's a difficult one, actually. I'm not quite sure how to answer that, because we do have very interesting academic courses now. It's almost like a crossover, if you like. I think it's important before you go to music college to try and get your technique as strong as you can, because I don't think it's so great to go to music college and then feel like you're being taken backwards when some of your peers are trotting off to chamber music rehearsals and your teachers saying, no, you mustn't do this, mustn't do that. In any case, I don't think teachers can do that anymore. We have to give them people the tools, and then I think they have to find their limits and then come back to you and say, help me, I need your help now. And yes, I'll help you. I think have stamina and be prepared for disappointments, because failures, small or big, is what we learn from as human beings. And I think also, don't expect to come out after 4 years and have a degree or a piece of paper from a university or a conservatoire, which means that you're now going to get a job. I think you've got to be prepared to maybe do a bit of this, do a bit of that, take advantages by being a younger person of what's available out in the world, to make connections with, I've got students who leave, who do arranging, and they're in touch with people in Albania, for example. So there's always openings out there, but be prepared for the long haul.
Sure. Wise words.
I hope so.
It's been an absolute pleasure to see you again.
Likewise.
Personally. And I know I can see there's still loads of participants enjoying this chat.
Oh, they stayed. That's marvellous.
They stayed. It's the true test. So thank you so much. And let's continue this relationship with ESTA as well, and try and do something like this again. That would be fantastic.
I'd love to. And I hope you managed to get out of the building, Rob.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. Thanks, Ben.
Pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.